the University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a lovely day today. We're having lovely sunshine after a very cold spell, and we're starting off this Cloudebate podcast series on different topics in the 4IR. With me today, I've got Professor Nnamdi Nwulu. He's a researcher, educationist, and engineer. Holds a BSc and MSc degree in electrical and electronic engineering, and a PhD in electrical engineering, if I'm correct. So yeah, very clever guy. I shy away from anything electronical after having shocked myself numerous times. But yeah, so welcome, Prof. It's nice to meet you and to have you here. We're going to have a bit of a discussion on blockchain.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, and good morning to you and the listeners.
Yeah. Perhaps a small introduction about you.
Okay, like you said, rightly said, my name is Nnamdi Nwulu. I lecture here at UJ in the Department of Electrical Engineering. And then my research basically has been in the mathematical modeling and machine learning space. And then recently we have begun to interface with emerging technologies, right, in various engineering systems. And then that's that's led to my foray into the blockchain space. So principally, we're looking at deploying blockchain technology for food traceability, right, which seeks to improve food security and food safety, right. So basically, what it entails is in the event that your food source is compromised, you're able to go back and trace where the food has gone through along the value chain, and perhaps where that contamination also occurred. So that was my initial foray into the blockchain space, right? And then it's expanded essentially, right, to other areas, to other domain applications of blockchain, right? And then so we got a chair from Coronet, which looks at blockchain applications in the African context, and then I'm looking at various issues like food supply chain, like I mentioned, also voting systems, right, and then trade platforms. So basically, that's how I got into blockchain-related research.
Yeah, fascinating. And I mean, food safety is such a big issue. We had that big listeriosis scare a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That was pre-COVID. I mean,
certainly.
It seems like a whole different world space that we're living in now. But food safety is critical, and as you rightly said, especially on the African continent. So you see blockchain being used there. But before we go into the applications of blockchain, perhaps we should just have a discussion on what blockchain is exactly. I mean, I've got many friends that's dabbling in Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah.
They've made lots of money. They've
I
lost even more.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm not smart enough to go into that. But driving into campus, I saw big billboards for Luno, which is a crypto wallet.
Exchange,
yeah. And it seems to be hotting up in the African context. Yeah. But what is blockchain? Is it just Bitcoin, or is there something else to it?
Okay, no, that's a very good question, right? Because most people think of blockchain as being solely cryptocurrency, which is not really the case, right? So to properly understand what a blockchain is, I think I would like to talk about what a distributed ledger technology actually is, because a blockchain is a type of a distributed ledger technology, right? So there are various. So all blockchains are DLTs, distributed ledger technologies, but not all DLTs are blockchains. Right? It's a subtype of a DLT. So historically, when you had, if you think about your in the informal sector, for instance, in your spaza shop or your tuck shop, right? And then you had folks that were doing some trading, right? And then the more conscientious ones would want to keep a record of the activities, right? Their inventory, the trades they make, the revenue that accrues to them, right? And they would typically do it in a book, right? Which it's called a ledger, right? So you have a ledger where you detail inventory, how much you've sold, who is owing you, how much payment has occurred, and the rest. So the ledger typically is used to record transactions, right? And then that has evolved, obviously, with the advent of digital technologies and the internet, as other things. Other things also have evolved, right? So you used to have an encyclopedia. You have Wikipedia now. You used to perhaps send emails via the post office. Now you do that with an email. So now those ledgers have evolved and they now become digital. However, even though they have evolved, right, the control is still centralized, right? So you have an individual that still maintains control of all the records, right? And then this now means that many parties, right, if you want to have access to those records, you have to go through that centralized authority. So now a decentralized or a distributed ledger technology, right, is leveraging technology to tweak that system, right, and changing it from control being vested only in the centralized authority, and you're now vesting control to every party in that network, right? So every party in that network maintains the ledger. Every party in that network has access to the data that is there, and everybody agrees how and when we can put in information into that ledger and the kind of information that can be appended to that ledger. So that's what a blockchain essentially is. So it's initially the two words were separated. It's a chain of blocks, right, where those blocks basically represent information, records, right, and then it increases chronologically as and at when you add more information onto those blocks. And then, so typically the principles that come to mind, or the design principles that they use when coming up with the concept of blockchain are three. Is the decentralization principle, and then it's also transparency, and also immutability. There are others, but those are the three I typically use the acronym DTI to remember: decentralization, transparency, and immutability. So what it means is all the parties, control is not in one, like I said before, it's not in the hands of one central authority. And then secondly, there's transparency. So especially for instances where there is a lack of trust among the parties, everybody sees what is going on. There's transparency, and then there is immutability, meaning that once the block is appended to the chain, you cannot erase it. You can only go back. If there's now an error, you can only go back and insert a correction, but that original error still stays there. Yeah. So those are the key design principles, if you like, for the blockchain. Now, there are also, so for a blockchain to work, there are also some policies that have to be agreed to by all the parties. The first would be the access policy, right? So all the nodes, all the parties that in that blockchain have to agree would be able to read that information or have access, would be able to see those records. So that's the access policy, one. And then you also have the control policy. So now the control policy now speaks to who or which member of which nodes or which member of the blockchain can actually append information, who can add information. Remember, the first ones can just perhaps read, but now you have the second class that can actually append more information to the blockchain and increase it sequentially. So there needs to be an agreement. Who is it open to add that information? And then that's now when you now have various classes of blockchains, like public blockchains, private blockchains, permission blockchains, consortium blockchains, if it's between companies and the rest. That speaks to the control policy that they deploy, right? And then the third one speaks to the consensus policy, right? The consensus algorithm. So meaning now that even though everybody can put in information to the blockchain, we must come to an agreement about the right way to get it done. Right? So we must come to an agreement about the consensus in case there's a dispute, right? What's the actual correct pattern of information that should be put in and how should it be done? So that's the consensus policy. So those three policies are also what every blockchain should have, right? And that determines the nature, right, and the type of that blockchain. Right? And then, yeah, I could go into the history, but I think that will suffice. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So it's interesting. So it's not just for money. It's for
Yes.
anything basically, from contracts to
records,
making
registries, medical
Yeah.
records.
medical records. I mean, that's something that could also be really used in an African context.
Certainly.
If I may, I recently visited the hospital, the records department, and it was amazing how they could find anything because it's stacked files just everywhere. And if you can have that on a blockchain, that might solve a lot of problems. And
if you went abroad, for instance, and God forbid, maybe there was an emergency, and then you might not be in a position to give them access to your records. But if it was on the blockchain, and it's easily accessible to the medical practitioners, say in another country or in another continent, right? It could possibly save lives too.
And you say it's secure. I mean, if we're talking about medical records, I don't want a big company to gain access to that.
Yes.
So there is some security built in as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you could do, like I said, each blockchain would come up with its own access policy. Right? So maybe you might have a patient that might not want to give access to maybe a pharmacy or people that maybe folks are excluding his primary healthcare practitioner, right? So you could maybe, if you're very privacy conscious, you could maybe define who you want to have access to your records. Another patient might be more lenient and want everybody to have access to that.
Yes.
So it all depends on the access policy that is defined in that setup.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me. You said that we agree we need to put in place access control measures. We need to come to a consensus. So it means more than one computer, more than one individual on the blockchain working together, which is a very African concept. I mean, Ubuntu. It's like we could say that the blockchain is a digital form of Ubuntu. But how do you see this technology in Africa? How can we leverage blockchain in an African context?
I think one of the key roles of blockchain is to. One of the things it does, like I said, is the decentralized nature of transactions, right? And then what that does is it removes intermediaries, it removes middlemen, right? And then it makes processes faster than they would have been otherwise. So now in Africa, we have a lot of cases where we have intermediaries, right, that are not efficient, right? It might be that they are not just efficient, and sometimes it might be that they have pecuniary reasons why they should not be efficient, like corruption and the rest, right? So with the advent of blockchain technology, it can eliminate, because it's a peer-to-peer mechanism. There's no central authority. There can be interactions that are transparent, removing the need for intermediaries. So an example would be the issue of elections, for instance, right? Voting, who comes to power, all across the African continent, you have issues about election integrity. At the votes, because typically it's done in some cases manually without electronic systems. And even when it's done with electronic systems, there are still issues that have to do with fraud and the rest. So deploying a blockchain solution in that space would strengthen I believe, the democratic experiment on the African continent, right? Bringing about really free and fair elections, right? So that's a prime example, I think, of a blockchain application in the African continent. Although, I mean, whether we are ready for it is another question entirely, right? Yeah. And then allied to that also has to do with the issue of procurement, right? Procurement and contracts, right? That's another area where, in Africa, it will benefit from transparency, right? Where everybody knows what are the terms, what are the requirements of the contract, who are those that are able to, get it done, what's their pedigree, and the rest, what are their bids, it's an open system. Procurement would also, in my view, significantly benefit from the deployment of blockchain. It will also perhaps bring down the cost of some of the projects that go on in Africa that are overly priced, because you have lots of middlemen that are taking their own cut from it, right? Another area that would benefit from the deployment of blockchain technology would be in the area of identity management, right? Issues like records. So we're all aware, we all know people that have had their data from Home Affairs compromised, right? Or people use their data to get access, loans and the rest without their knowledge, compromised records, right? Identity management is an issue, right? Not just in South Africa. I can give examples elsewhere. So should blockchain be leveraged in that space, right? It would make it better for there to be real integrity in that space and mitigate issues of fraud and identity theft and the rest, right? And then you also have other areas like I've mentioned before, food supply traceability, for food safety. Also the area of academic records, right? Which is, we all know, even in the South African context, various people that have occupied sensitive positions claim they had certain degrees. Yeah. And then credentialing for fraud is an issue. And you see a couple of, I think I saw some data that some countries in Europe spend a significant amount of money trying to verify records and trying to mitigate or combat misrepresentation in that space, right? So leveraging blockchain technology would be a very pivotal role. Blockchain can play a very pivotal role in mitigating issues of fraud in that space. So there are also in the area of energy trading. So you would agree with me that all across Africa there are issues with energy, and then what I feel is the solution is that we have to also move towards having microgrids, because the main grid actually is not really working. And if you check when Africa had a connection problem in the area of telephony, right? Landlines were not really working. And when mobile telephones came, which was sort of distributed, right, it was able to bridge the telephone access gap across Africa. I believe that the same thing is also required in the energy space, right? Central big electric utilities doesn't seem to be working in many African states. So there is the need to move to the realm of microgrids, right? Smaller energy generators, embedded generators, and the rest. So now that raises issues in terms of transactions, payments, and the rest. So blockchain, which is also a decentralized system, can also ease the adoption and also sort out some of the transactions in peer-to-peer energy trading. Right, and then we have done, I and a couple of my students, we've published some papers in that regard, how to various looking at various energy setups and how to facilitate payment and exchange of energy within various players in that space. So that's also another area where blockchain can also play a very pivotal role.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would also think about in the area of mitigating counterfeit products. So across Africa, maybe it's not predominant in South Africa, but in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, there are issues that have to do with fake drugs, right? So people, unscrupulous elements get fake drugs and people die because of all these drugs. So a blockchain system that would prove the authenticity, right, of some of these products, right, would also find practical deployment in the African context.
Yeah. And it sounds all very far away, but in reality, we are busy implementing these blockchain already. I mean, UJ has now implemented it with our graduates certificates, which is I think it's one of the first universities to do it in Africa.
Certainly.
And I also read that our license, our driving licenses, that's also going to be on a blockchain now in the South African context. I'm hoping that it is going to happen. We'll have to see. The article mentioned that it's going to be in 2023.
Okay.
Once the new machines come. So that would be excellent, because then we cannot have drivers on the roads without a valid license. No, that's very interesting. And in terms of education space, is there anything else except for academic records that one can use this technology in?
I think academic records is the predominant application, right? In the educational space, like you rightly mentioned, UJ is a pioneer in that space. So UJ students can share some of their details with employers and the rest, and then to prove the authenticity of their qualifications and the rest. And then, but we must also understand now that most folks are now there's now the concept of lifelong learning, right? Yeah. In most cases, people will still go on to get maybe not major degrees, but certificates, micro credentials, right? Apprenticeships, and then digital certificates and the rest. So the concept can also be extended away from the HEIs, higher education institutions like UJ, to other the informal sector, for instance, right? Skill acquisition centers, right? At the lower levels, it can also play a role there, right? So, if, for instance, you claim you have a certain skill that might not necessarily stem from the educational space, how do other people verify that you really have that skill set, right? Yeah. Or how do you get referees, to attest to that skill set, so you could have that on the blockchain at a much more informal level, and that would also be helpful. And then basically, even in the education space, apart from credentials, you still have a lot of data that is shared across most of the players in the educational ecosystem, right? So the credential one is between the student and then the university and then employers, but then even amongst universities, amongst accreditation bodies, right? Amongst, I know we deal with a lot of paperwork.
Too much.
Yeah, too much that ever so often gets missing, or you lose it. So you can also benefit from the adoption of blockchain technology, right? To accreditation is a big issue. We always see about EXA, and the rest. And that's the Engineering Council of South Africa. So how can blockchain can also be deployed in systems that require data across players in the ecosystem. And then we could also use blockchains, because one of their key components is what is called a smart contract. Right, so a smart contract basically is eliminating the human involvement in processes, right? So instead of, if maybe there's a process that involves lots of actors, right, and it follows a process, follows various stages, right, automating that process and eliminating the bottleneck. So an example is maybe if you buy a house and you're registering it in the deeds office, it involves your lawyer, it involves the estate agent, so many people. Automating that process will eliminate all those intermediaries and make it faster.
Yeah.
You might, in the educational space where you have lots of intermediaries, if you deploy the blockchain in that space, you might see now that there are improved outcomes, right? Learning can be faster and they can be better that way.
Yeah, I mean, if your personal information is on a blockchain and you apply to the university, that application process can also become much easier to process from a university side of you, but also from a student's side of you.
It can basically help all the various players in the ecosystem, in the educational ecosystem. I remember what I was trying to say. And then what I was talking about, the smart contract, is conceivably you could use a smart contract to automate the marking process, right? You could automate.
That sounds excellent.
you could use the smart contract to automate the marking process and then the grading. The grading, especially for things that are clearly objective. So a smart contract would not work in instances where there's some subjectivity because it's the computer code, right? So if maybe you have to consider various extenuating circumstances and make a decision, so a smart contract would not be suitable there. But if it's a case where it's purely objective, you either have obtained it or you haven't, then you could conceivably use a smart contract. The whole process is transparent to all students, right, and to the staff and everybody. And then because you have a lot of feedback from students, I wasn't marked properly, but that process is it can be automated. A student can submit and then the smart contract just runs it and then he or she knows it's great and then everybody is happy, right?
This reminds me of a series I watched a while ago, British comedy stand-up show. And they had this one lady that would book tours, and she would type away on a computer. If someone comes with an answer with a question, type away on a computer, look at the screen, and then just say, "Computer says no." And that was the whole catchline. Computer says no. So when
you would have to fight with the computer to convince her otherwise.
But would governments go for this? I mean,
that's a very good question, a good point, right? In terms of, for instance, in the area of procurement, where you have vested interest, you might maybe see some reluctance on the path of government players, right, to adopt these technologies. But by and large, I think that they would have to come on board sooner.
So that political will needs to be there.
That political will needs to be there. But I do not necessarily think that they have a choice with time. So now you have several countries coming up with digital currencies, right, and tying it to stable coins in the cryptocurrency realm, and then governments are looking a bit more in the cryptocurrency space and trying to consider how it can ease payments, right, and basically get a lot of people more into the formal economy, because the way the current systems work, you typically need an ID, you typically need a lot of documentation to be in the formal economy. But now in the crypto space, you just need a phone. You have access to some of your friends that you mentioned. Dealing with Luno and the rest, right? So it has the potential to bring in a lot of people that hitherto were excluded from the formal economy into the formal economy.
Now that sounds it sounds so optimistic. Which is Which is something that's much needed. I mean, we've been through 2 years that's
Yeah.
been quite interesting, and having that hope for
Yeah.
a better future, and this technology building a better future for us, and that makes me optimistic. That makes me excited. If I want to get involved in blockchain, how would you suggest I get involved in it? Say for instance, I'm just finishing high school and I want to get involved in blockchain because I believe this is a technology that's going to give me a job one day, that's going to give me a lot of financial security. How would you suggest getting involved?
Okay, there is a need on the African continent to expose a lot more of our youth, right, to the technology, right? Because it really is the future, and then if it's not properly harnessed, as our VC often talks about, it can also exacerbate the issue of a digital divide.
Yes, yes.
So if you want to get into blockchain, of course you could get into cryptocurrency. So you have lots of Africans already that are in this cryptocurrency space, and then they hedge their bets on the rise of certain coins, and then make some money, right? That's the cryptocurrency space, right? But then you could also get into other areas. Blockchain has impacts on since it's a new field, there are going to be legal implications, right? So, for instance, digital assets, there are going to be legal questions that needs to be sorted out, right? If you're going to be sequestrated, for instance, and you have digital assets that are not necessarily in your bank account, or they're not tangible assets. How should they be handled? Instance.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I mean,
so that also there's need for people to answer those legal questions, right? There are regulatory issues, right, with blockchain technology, right, and then governments typically want to encourage innovation, right, because blockchain has the potential, like I said earlier on, to bring in people into the formal economy, and unlock economic opportunities. At the same time, because of the pseudo-anonymous nature of the technology, it's also it can also be taken advantage by folks for maybe money laundering, for maybe terrorism financing, and the rest. Right?
Yeah.
So government has to find the balance in that space. So there's still the need for the people to experience the technology and come up with viewpoints to shaping how the regulators go forward with the technology. And then, of course, in the application space, right? We talked about various areas where blockchain can find applications, right? And then we need young people with ideas, with young people that understand their own peculiar circumstances, that would leverage the technology to solve societal problems, right? I often say that we have a job problem in Africa. We should be creating, I think, about 15 million jobs per annum, and we create only about under 3 million.
Yeah.
Right. So there's need for entrepreneurs in the space that can unlock the technology and then unlock economic benefit for the majority of us.
And having these smaller businesses, they employ a lot of people.
Yes.
If you start with a small business and you build your way up, you take a lot of people along with you on the journey and give them work. And many of those will leave and start their own companies. So really, from the ground up, I believe small and medium enterprises, that's the way to go.
Certainly. That's how China was able to push people from poverty up onto the middle class.
Yes.
Certainly.
I mean, it's amazing, and it was done in a matter of 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you take that into account, I mean, Rwanda is another case of a country that's really building itself up very
Yeah.
quickly
Yeah.
following the 1994 massacre.
Yeah.
There is hope.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
thing. We just need people with a will to start changing things.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of programming languages, what would you suggest someone study or get involved in?
So it depends on if you're working on in terms of smart contracts, right? I would say that Solidity is your best friend. Right?
Okay.
So you need to learn Solidity, right? And then and we have a couple of some of my students. A couple of us have. A couple of my students are, and there are a lot of resources online, right? To gain expertise in Solidity, right? And then and that's good for public blockchains.
Okay.
Right? Solidity, right? Smart contracts, DeFi, and the rest. Solidity is the language of choice. And then if you go towards private blockchains, typically Hyperledger, Hyperledger Fabric, then you would need languages like Golang, right? Node.js, right? And then those are the languages that are typically deployed in that space, right?
Okay.
And then there are a host of others.
Yes.
Right, and the tech space is a rapidly evolving space.
Way too fast.
Yeah, so you even have now some programs that they give you snippets. You want to achieve something, it just gets you a snippet of the code. You don't necessarily need to write it out in full any longer. So yeah, but for coding, yeah, I would say start with Solidity, start with Golang for public blockchains and for private blockchains, and then you progress as you go along.
Yeah. So there you have it. You can go onto YouTube or the internet on Google and go and have a look at those languages if you want to.
I also know that I think the IIS is also UG is also working on a couple of those
So
trainings with practical trainings in that space. Yeah.
practical trainings. We've got short learning programs on blockchain development at UJ, which is available for people interested in this field. There's many opportunities. It just goes. You need to go out and find these opportunities and go for it. I think we've covered quite a lot of what blockchain is, and I know there's so much more to be said about it. Are people? Is it possible to contact you? Can we share your email address?
Yeah, sure. My email address is NWULU@uj.ac.za.
Excellent. So if you're interested in blockchain, you can contact Prof Nnamdi, and perhaps if you are a graduate that's looking for a postgraduate opportunity, we can certainly discuss what is available and how we can get more people involved in this.
Certainly.
That was fascinating. Thanks so much, Prof. I understand a bit more about blockchain now.
A bit more, yeah. But it's difficult to understand it completely in over a 30 minutes discussion.
But I think there's so much new technologies coming out, and it's such an exciting time to be alive in. But I really thank you for your time. It's been wonderful meeting with you.
Thank you kindly for having me.
Yeah, and
thank you to the team for organizing.
And I look forward to having you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's it for our first podcast on the Cloudebate. We thank you for listening and tune in soon when we start discussing the metaverse and the applications thereof in an African context.
The University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.